Kazushi Sakuraba, the IQ Wrestler. A Japanese catch-as-catch-can and professional wrestler who became legendary for his bouts with much larger fighters and his multiple victories over members of the Gracie family that also earned him the nickname, the Gracie Hunter. In this study, we're going to look at the career, techniques, impact, and the legacy of Sakuraba on the sport and the entertainment side of the industry. See, as a professional wrestler, he made sure his entrances into the Pride Ring were always a spectacle and entertaining, and it was another form of entertainment that would be the catalyst for Sakuraba's entrance into the sport of mixed martial arts. Born in Japan in 1969, as a youth, Sakuraba was a fan of the Japanese manga or graphic novel called Tiger Mask, which tells the story of a professional wrestler who battles against a mysterious organization of wrestling villains known as the Tiger's Den. The manga also had an anime television show featuring the same professional wrestling storyline that inspired Sakuraba to follow the career path of the protagonist. Sakuraba began amateur freestyle wrestling in high school that led to him having success representing Chuo University. There he was coached by Olympic gold medalist and world champion Shozo Sasahara. But after turning down the opportunity to stay on and coach at the university, he decided to continue with his original intention and started his professional wrestling career in the Union of Wrestling Forces International Organization. But how does a young athlete pursuing a career in professional wrestling become the biggest adversary of a notorious no-rules fighting family? This is where we have to explore the origins of professional wrestling itself and how Sakuraba trained. See, many of the moves that Sakuraba used to defeat his opponents can all be seen in vintage professional wrestling matches. This is because the roots of professional wrestling can all be traced back to catch wrestling or catch-as-catch-can, a collection of several English wrestling styles, the most prominent of these being Lancashire catch-as-catch-can, and dating back to around 1870 in England, a full decade before the establishment of judo's Kodokan dojo. Now, catch wrestling was a legitimate combat sport that involved winning by pin or submission, and catch wrestling was even included in the second modern Olympic Games in 1904. But eventually, with some submission techniques considered too dangerous, rule sets evolved that removed submissions and led to the creation of folk-style wrestling in America and freestyle wrestling in the Olympics. Professional wrestling also evolved out of this style, so in the beginning, all pro wrestlers had legitimate grappling skills, or as it was known, the ability to shoot, making the bouts seem more realistic, and they may have even issued challenges for anyone in the crowd looking to test their might against the travelling show. But over time, professional wrestling drifted further away from the sporting aspect and more towards the entertainment side, with promoters finding it more profitable to have matches with outcomes within their control, resulting with less of a requirement for wrestlers having legitimate grappling credentials. But eventually demand for a return to more realistic matches was seen in Japan, which led to the creation of Japanese shoot style or strong style wrestling. This was spearheaded by catch wrestler Karl Gotch, known as the god of wrestling in Japan, and for who the German suplex is named after, and also legendary Antonio Inoki, who famously had an early mixed rules match against Muhammad Ali, and both of these men were pivotal in the creation of the Japanese MMA scene. Now, shoot style was professional wrestling performed in a hybrid style that intended to appear as legitimate freestyle fighting while still retaining a predetermined winner. And the UWFi that Kazushi Sakuraba made his debut in was one of a handful of these shoot style promotions. The UWFi employed legendary catch wrestler Billy Robinson to train its wrestlers with the legitimate submission grappling skills of catch-as-catch-can to increase the level of submission grappling ability in their bouts. Billy Robinson learned his catch wrestling at the legendary Wigan Snakepit in England under Billy Riley, who learned Lancashire catch-as-catch-can from the coal miners of the area. After learning his skills as a young man, Billy Robinson then became an experienced professional wrestler who travelled all around the globe performing. Sakuraba, now with his catch wrestling training he received under the watchful eye of Billy Robinson, was able to use that submission grappling style and the influence of the Wigan Snakepit in all of his future bouts. Now, beginning with Antonio Inoki, Japan had a tradition of entering their pro wrestlers into freestyle fights to prove their strength. And while the outcome often didn't go the way of the wrestler, it was from this tradition that Sakuraba entered the UFC in Japan as a late replacement to help promote the Kingdom Pro Wrestling League. Shockingly, he then defeated the much larger Marcus Silveira, becoming the first person in the UFC to tap a BJJ black belt and winning the UFC Ultimate Japan Heavyweight Tournament. From then on, representing pro wrestling, Sakuraba would become one of the all-time greats of freestyle fighting, with many of his victories coming from catch-as-catch-can submissions. But before Sakuraba could use his catch wrestling, he would have to deal with the fight starting standing and work with his striking skills. Now, Sakuraba was never really known for his striking prowess. A southpaw, he was mainly characterised from his rushing flurries and swarms towards his opponent. His main goal would have always been to secure a takedown and work towards a submission, but he was not afraid to throw down with some of the scariest strikers in the sport, including Mirko Krokop, Vanderlei Silva and Rampage Jackson. He was able to throw off his opponents with an array of unique and deceptive tricks, including a standing double axe handle or a standing hammer fist. But along with the catch wrestling training, Sakuraba also received training in Muay Thai from Bovi Chawaikung. He was employed to train the wrestlers and also competed for the UWFi in a series of kickboxing matches in what was known as the UWF International Stand-Up Fighting Division. As such, Sakuraba was able to strike and also had a few sleight of hand or gimmick techniques like faking a hook and throwing a straight right and other means of feints and deception, which played a large role in his striking game, including feigning to the head and going to the body, while faking to the body and going to the head. Later in his career, after 2 fights with Vanderlei Silva, he even went down to shootbox in Brazil to work with Rafael Cordeiro, and managed to win 2 fights from using his punches. One against Ken Shamrock as he slapped down his lead hand to land a straight left, and another against the judoka Yung Dong-sik after battering him in his debut bout. But perhaps a larger part of his striking arsenal was his array of kicks, including massive head kicks and relentless, brutal low kicks whenever an opponent attempted to step in, and even spinning back kicks. The consistent volley of leg kicks that Sakuraba would throw at his opponents would also then set up other avenues for Sakuraba to feint, as he would then feint his leg kicks to put an opponent defensively onto one leg and then follow through with a straight punch that would catch many fighters off guard. He was even able to feint a leg kick to help set up a takedown. The repeated leg kicks and perhaps also the heavily taped knees would then draw opponents into leg kicking back at Sakuraba, and that would also lead to further takedown opportunities as he was adept at catching an opponent's kick out of mid-air and turning it into a wrestling exchange where he could put them onto the mat. Once he was in a wrestling exchange, Sakuraba's wrestling experience allowed him to implement a wide variety of takedowns, including body locks, throws, ankle picks, double legs, trips, and his most frequently used, which was the single leg takedown. Sakuraba's amateur wrestling career was also quite successful. At high school, he placed as high as second in the nation, and in his university career, where he would also serve as team captain, he won the East Japan tournament in his freshman year, and in his senior year, he finished in 4th place in the All Japan tournament. He also held a notable win over future Olympic bronze medalist Takuya Ota. When Sakuraba did snatch a single leg, his favourite way of finishing the takedown was by running the pipe or a dump. This is where he rotates his body while putting his head, shoulder and chest pressure down on his opponent's thigh to make them sit to the mat. As an art, catch wrestling is also very rich in takedowns, along with the submissions, as the stand-up wrestling portions would take up a large amount of the bouts, as it invariably valued top position more, where you can ride your opponent and use your weight and gravity on top of them. So in catch wrestling, sitting down or to guard is frowned upon heavily, but also not very advantageous, as it won't give you a good pathway to victory. So all this takedown experience made Sakuraba very dangerous when he was trying to put his opponents onto the mat. But once Sakuraba had taken his opponent down, unless he was able to land straight into side control, he often found himself at the end of their feet, allowing them to guard, which would be one of Sakuraba's most difficult, yet also one of the most exciting parts of his game. So while the guard does exist in catch wrestling, where it's called the body scissors, due to the nature of pinning, it's not as extensively developed or trained as much as other grappling styles. At the end of an open guard, Sakuraba was so troubled that he might even elect to grab his opponents by their feet and drag them around the mat rather than look to pass. And even Vitor Belfort sat to guard against Sakuraba, as he knew it was a weak area of his game. Sakuraba would then thrill the fans by attacking with stomps, round kicks over the top, and sliding baseball kicks at his opponents. Perhaps his most notorious method was the cartwheel guard pass, where he would look to cartwheel over the side of the opponent's guard, posting a hand on their foot. He'd run and launch into a spectacular cartwheel attempt that was visually impressive, but never really worked effectively as a successful pass. The other method that wowed the fans would be a high-flying jump over the guard completely. Sakuraba would take a run up and might try and land cleanly on the other side, or come down with a stomp on top of the opponent, or even throw a dramatic flying punch on his way back down to the mat. Sakuraba did this so often that simply taking a few steps back for a run-up would get the crowd anticipating the high-flying attack. He was also able to use the threat of the jumping guard pass to help brutalize the legs of his opponents with kicks. As he would fake a jump, the opponent would raise their feet, exposing their thighs, for Sakuraba to fire off devastating low kicks. Kicking the opponent's legs while standing over them in open guard was an area that Sakuraba became proficient at, as he was able to inflict a lot of damage and harm to his opponents, as he showed when he brutalized Royler Gracie's legs in their outing. But kicks were not the only way that Sakuraba would attack the legs, as leglocks are also a preferred technique of Sakuraba and of catch wrestling. Karl Gotch even once stated that if a jiu-jitsu guy has you in his guard and you didn't break his leg with a leg lock, then you should quit wrestling forever. And Sakuraba certainly embodied this ethos, as he died for toe holds, knee bars and footlocks at every opportunity. Catch wrestling has always valued leg locks as a technique, and even influenced other arts like Sambo to incorporate them into their own style. As the name Catch as Catch Can suggests, you take whatever hold your opponent gives you. So if an opponent plays guard, then the feet, ankle and legs are always going to be the first avenue available to attack. And even on the rare occasion that Sakuraba was on his back, he would look to move into a single leg X-guard to attack the heel of the opponent. The offense-orientated and attacking style of submission grappling that Sakuraba practiced allowed him to go for quick kills immediately after a takedown while the feet were still in his hands. And Sakuraba had a commitment and belief in the power of leg locks that would see him hold on to some for an extraordinarily long amount of time, as he would chain between toe holds, knee bars and straight ankle locks while absorbing an extraordinary amount of punishment while he searched for the finishing hold. So while on the ground, Sakuraba was on the hunt for leg locks, and this would even help open up the opponent's guard, allow Sakuraba to get back to his feet, or it could even set up successful guard passing opportunities. And while Sakuraba didn't successfully pass the guard often, he did also have some success with a few fairly basic guard passing strategies. Generally, Sakuraba's passing attempts involved simply pushing down on his opponent's knees while he tried to step over to force a half guard or try and slide over the top completely. Certainly nothing fancy, but a constant forward pressure that Sakuraba would continually go for, and did make work for him on occasion. The constant forward pressure would be something that Sakuraba would consistently apply while in his opponent's guard, as he would rain down double axe handle chops and try to barrel forward straight over the top of the opponent. If he was attempting to be defensive in his opponent's guard, he'd generally dive under their legs and look for double unders to keep himself free from any potential triangle or arm bars, and also hoist the opponents up to land ground and pound strikes straight down the middle. He would also combine his double unders with his guard passing attempts, as he'd go for double leg drags while standing or on the ground, and used it to pass successfully on multiple occasions. Once Sakuraba did get past the guard, he would start to look for another quick kill by diving onto armbars, and it's here where we'll pick up with part 2 as we finish by examining his use of catch wrestling armbars, rolling to his belly and turtle, his infamous double wrist lock, and the legacy that Sakuraba has left on the sport and entertainment industry of mixed martial arts. As I still have a lot more to say about this quirky, eccentric, and entertaining catch-as-catch-can wrestler. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 2, and let me know in a comment down below what you thought of this video and Sakuraba, as I spent a long time on this one and I'd love to hear from you. Also, you might be interested in checking out my new podcast, The Sonny Brown Breakdown, at sonnybrownbreakdown.com, where I have an interview up with Jake Shannon on the history of catch wrestling and of Sakuraba. Thank you.